Hello, viewers. This is your host, Dhiren Mehta from The Global Perspective. As we all know, most of the mainstream media is controlled by large corporates and lobbyists and are catering to special interest groups. Most of the reporting today in the mainstream media is agenda driven, based on the twisted stories or selective one sided aspects. We are a new age crowdsourced reporting medium that aims to provide voice to opinion makers that bring alternate perspectives that need to be heard as well. We are committed to make honest effort to bring this alternate perspective on issues of global relevance that the mainstream media generally does not present well. Today, we are going to discuss on the coronavirus pandemic that has caused devastation across the world. Today, we have David, a well-known author, co-founder of Alt News Media, very active in social media with over 200,000 followers. He is very critical of how the UK government has handled COVID pandemic, and we'll hear his perspective on that. We have Francios Gautier, who is a French journalist and chief editor of a French magazine. He is a writer, historian. He has built one of the largest private museum in India showcasing the Indian history. And he's also an art of living teacher and living in India for last 35 years with his wife Namrita. We also have Ravi Batra, who is an attorney based out of New York, representing governments and corporates as well as individuals. He has been involved in geopolitics for over 35 years and is the chair of National Advisory Council, South Asian Affairs. He's also a legal advisor to the Ukrainian mission to UN, and he's a COVID survivor. So we'll hear from him what was his experience and what he sees could have been done to mitigate the risks of COVID and manage the pandemic better. Also, we have Renee, who is a social activist, author, and founder of Voice for India. In her two most recent books, she talks about bias of the mainstream media. She's a social activist for India's and US political and social affairs and travels to India very frequently, and she loves India and calls it as her second motherland. So welcome to the panel, and we'll start with our panel discussion in 4 segments, and hope you enjoy this. So in our first segment today, we are going to talk about the origin of the virus, and we'll discuss what potentially caused the outbreak and spread across the world. So first, let's start with Ravi. You have been the victim, and your entire family, in fact, was infected by COVID. So please share with our viewers what was your experience going through this disease.
Sure. And since today in the United States is Mother's Day, I want to acknowledge Mother's Day, my late mother, my wife, who's mother of 2 of my kids, and of course, Mother Nature, who we can never ignore. But going back to coronavirus, sometime in March, in middle of March, with everything normal, on March 14th, which was the morning after, I had been at a UN event the night before, and everything was fine. The morning, the March 14th, I ended up feeling very high fever at that time, what I thought was high, and so much so that I called the New York State Department of Health to ask for testing, and that was at that point, 101.7 or something, and this proceeded to where the strain that I had and the strain that my wife and daughter had were different because their temperatures went a little above 102, whereas mine reached 104.3. And over a period of 16 days, we went through these trials and tribulations. I took the anti-malaria medication for 5 out of 6 days until my doctor stopped me, along with Zithromax and Tylenol. So those were my steady companions. There was no respiratory, illness or anything of the kind. And during this process, which is in the public domain and it's been written about, during this process, what I discovered was that I felt that the coronavirus, just anecdotally, was a Trojan horse, because I had not done anything that would have caused me to get sick. Normally, if you walk in the rain without your coat or you don't have your hat on and you get a cold or a flu, you would know the cause. You have food, maybe you had bad oysters. So you had the cause and effect. Here I had the effect, but no cause, because there was nothing out of the ordinary. And here I had it. So I felt that whatever this virus was, it was able to get through my autoimmune system without being noticed as a stranger or an enemy. And I wrote about this, as I said, on April 6th. It was published. And then I got into the idea of looking at coronavirus almost like I would do a cancer case, and spent a couple of weeks doing that, and getting into the biochemistry and the epidemiology. Then am I writing a letter to the president on April 14th? April 14th. With the science and the letter and my recommendations, but I guess we'll get to that later. But the coronavirus is an export out of China, which is I think their biggest miscalculation that they've ever made. The Chinese people have a great civilization, great people, great history, but this particular export, I think, is their Achilles heel.
Thanks, Ravi, and wish you all the best. Hope you fully recover and your family. All the best to you.
Thank you. 6 weeks of quarantine.
That's very difficult. That's challenging. But glad that you are recovering fast.
Me too. Thank you.
So thanks for that, Ravi. David, you are from UK, and UK has been very badly affected as well, like US. And Ravi did mention about the situation in US briefly about with himself, though. But what do you think could be the cause of this virus outbreak, and how did it spread worldwide and not contained?
Yeah, well, I would suggest that the cause of the COVID-19 outbreak is 3 words: Chinese Communist Party. That's the cause of the coronavirus outbreak, and we all know that it started in Wuhan province in China. So we know the where. And you don't have to be an absolute genius to work out, well, let's think about this. In Wuhan, there is a high-level laboratory which, curiously enough, does research into virology, including into the coronaviruses. So honestly, you don't have to be a genius to see that if this was a murder, it's all pointing in the same direction. It came from China. It came from a lab controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And it seems that it emerged from that lab, actually, interestingly, round about October of last year, sometime round about then. It's not confirmed yet, but it appears to have. Now, we don't know how that happened. It could have been an accident. It could have been bad hygiene. Could have been lots of reasons. But that's where it started. And that's what the Chinese Communist Party are desperate to try and obfuscate and try and pretend that, oh no, it came from the bat market and from the wet market in Wuhan. No, it didn't, in my opinion. It came from the lab that they're responsible for. It's gone around the world, and so I would agree with what Ravi's just said. Actually, the Chinese Communist Party, which controls China with an iron fist, they have exported misery, economic disaster, so much pain to so many people in so many countries. So, let's be really clear in this broadcast. Responsibility lies with the Chinese Communist Party, and they must be made to pay for what they have done to each and every one of us and everyone watching this broadcast.
So thanks, David. Understand your perspective. So Renee, we talked about, this emerging from China, as both David and Ravi talked about. Uh, there were some whistleblowers that came out of China initially and then suddenly disappeared, right? And there were also whistleblowers somewhere in US, and we heard some of the whistleblowers disappearing. What are your thoughts on that?
Obviously, China is trying to cover up something. They tried to cover up from the beginning. There's a couple whistleblowers in China in the very beginning. One prominent, Dr. Li Wenlang, if I'm saying his name right, when he was videoing everything and the police came, they detained him and they forced him to stop making false accusations. Well, why would they have to threaten people? What are they scared of? Obviously, China's been hiding this for a while now, and when it got out of control and out of hand, when they couldn't hide it anymore, they had to come out. That's why they were forcing the people in China to control them, to not do videos, to not go on social media and share it, because they were trying to hide this whole coronavirus thing. But it leaked out, and I want to know is, in 2017, Obama and Fauci gave $3.7 million to the Wuhan lab, which they are investigating right now. This whole thing, I believe, is bio-warfare, and it started in the lab in Wuhan. That's why China's been lying from the very beginning. That's why they were killing people and detaining them that were doing the videos, because they didn't want it to get out to the public. So that is as clear as day. And if people can't see that, people are making, especially the fake news media, come on, it's as clear as day that this came from Wuhan, and, it just got out of hand and they couldn't control their lives any longer.
Francois, can you share with us your perspective on the fact that the coronavirus, as the data suggests, emerged somewhere in November in Hubei district of China, right? China imposed lockdown in Hubei district and specifically in Wuhan somewhere in the middle of January. So why is that the pandemic has spread across the world and caused devastation in US, Europe, and other parts of the world, but outside Hubei district of China, there is hardly any effect of this spread? Why is the spread not gone? Other lockdown months, the emergence of the virus, but it could spread so far. So what could be the reason for that?
Okay, I think there are two parts to your question. The first one is why in China, outside of the Hubei province, it is spread so little, that there are so little people who died in China. I think one is the Chinese have, understated their casualties. And the second one is that I saw once on French television, a French reporter who had a hidden camera and went around Wuhan. And the Chinese have been very ruthless in their, in their approach to confinement. They use drones. They had people who had been, inoculated with a vaccine. They must have a vaccine. There was a green light on their phone so that they could be tracked down and they could be allowed to move. So the Chinese have been extremely strict, and in fact, the entire world is trying to follow the Chinese model. With more or less success, because of course, nobody is as disciplined and as fearful than the Chinese. So in the West, I know in France, it's more difficult to make people, have a strict confinement. In India, it's even more difficult. So the first part is the Chinese have been extremely ruthless in their approach to confinement, to confine the virus. The second part, why did it spread so much in the West? Personally, I don't think that this is a conspiracy. I don't think the Chinese willfully, decided to give the virus to the entire planet. I think they let the Chinese go knowing that they were carrying the virus, and that it infected the whole planet. So it is criminal. In fact, it is criminal. The fact that the Chinese knowingly allowed Chinese traveling abroad. I remember seeing in Italy. Italy was, as you know, is the most the country in Europe which was most touched by the coronavirus. I saw Chinese, chaining themselves in Florence on the plaza and telling people, "Look, I am a human being. I'm not carrying any virus," and people would go and embrace them. So actually, the Chinese did let the virus come to Europe and to the US knowingly, and I believe it is a crime. So it is not a conspiracy.
But Francois, one perspective that you mentioned that they controlled very well, but they controlled within the Hubei district. So the point, the question that still remains is that why outside Hubei district for 2 months there was no lockdown in Hubei district, so people would have traveled outside Hubei to other parts of China where there was no lockdown. Why the spread was not as much outside Hubei district? Right? Is there something that we don't understand? Is there something that we don't have enough information on to really say why the virus contained within Hubei district of China and very little outside China, outside Hubei district of China?
So I think first the Chinese controlled in a very ruthless manner, as I said, the virus within the Wuhan province. And secondly, do they have a vaccine? Do they have an antidote? Some people have said they have, and they have, that they have inoculated, the whole of China with it. I'm not sure about it, but certainly the Chinese are not telling us the whole story. They're not telling us, why there is so little casualties in China and so much more in Europe and in the US. So we don't know the whole story, and I think, though I'm not a fan of Mr. Trump, I do think that he's right to demand to the Chinese that they open themselves to an international inquest into how this developed, how the Chinese, have so little casualties officially, how they allowed Chinese going abroad, knowing that they were carrying the virus and this virus was highly contagious. So there has to be I think it is going to happen. I think the Western world, though the media is still defending China, we see that I'm seeing in France that the newspapers are saying, "Oh, don't attack China. Why do you want to attack China now?" I think slowly the Western world is going to ask China for accounts, and we're going to know the truth sooner or later.
Dhiren, may I add?
Yes, please go ahead.
During my 2 weeks of cracking this case type effort, I discovered that in early 2019, China had inoculated most of its population with what they called the TB vaccine. Now, what was in the TB vaccine, I don't know. And we don't know, as Francois said, we don't have the full truth yet. But it is a fact that outside of Wuhan, there is very little transmission of coronavirus to other Chinese cities, even though they're very close, like Beijing, Shanghai, etc. So it is a legitimate question for all of us to ask, why is it that the mother lode of this virus, which was in Wuhan, and Chinese go all over the place, including inside China, why is it that when they traveled inside China, China was really not affected, but when they traveled outside of China, the world got affected? So that's an important fact and a very troubling predicate for an inquiry.
Yeah. So thanks. With that, we end our first segment and see you in our next segment. Thank you so much. Welcome to segment 2. In this segment, we'll talk about how the pandemic has been managed across the world, how various countries across the globe, as well as the agency who has managed the pandemic, has the lockdown been effective, how the testings have been conducted across in different parts of the world, and what are the various facilities, etc. So, Francois, starting with you, how do you think, who has managed the pandemic? Do you see some complacency in a way who has managed this?
So you see the head of WHO, Dr. Tedros, who is an Ethiopian, started his career as a junior health minister of a Maoist dictator, Mr. Mengistu Haile Mariam, who was a dictator in the 80s and 90s of Ethiopia, was a staunch Maoist. So my belief is that Dr. Tedros still has a lot of love and a lot of sympathy for China, because China is the is the fountainhead of the Maoist movement. And you see there is a photo of Dr. Tedros when he meets the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, and he looks like he's kneeling down. Have you seen that photo? He's half kneeling down, taking with a very respectful distance from the president, and one knee is kneeling down. So I think the fact that Dr. Tedros shielded the Chinese, and he's still shielding the Chinese, he's still saying that there is no fault on the part of the Chinese, though he must be knowing otherwise, come from the fact that he started his career as a Maoist under a Maoist government, and he probably has some sympathy still. He's going to be he needs to give accounts of himself also on who has in my belief is that who has created more panic than good. The way I perceive it is that who is a panic master, is telling the world that millions are going to be affected, they're going to be a second wave, So instead of telling people, look, let us take care, let us take all precautions, but it's a virus, all the big pandemics that happened in the world, such as Spanish flu, they've come to an end. Antibodies are created, and somehow we'll come out of it. Dr. Tedros, apart from the fact that he shielded the Chinese, has not been a good director of WHO, and he's at fault.
Is he somehow towing Chinese line?
Yeah, he's towing the Chinese line, definitely, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Again, I'm no fan of Mr. Trump, but he's the only world leader who had the guts to say so. My French president, Mr. Macron, doesn't say a word about the Chinese. Recently, there was a French journalist, who thought he was offline and who actually was online, and he said, "Oh, the Chinese, they're like, mopions. Mopions is the French term, the derogatory." He was fired. Next day, was fired. The Chinese embassy in France, keeps sending denials, keeps, berating people on Twitter. They block people on Twitter in France. So they believe that they behave like dictators. Yeah. It's amazing, but I think it will come to an end. I think the Chinese are going to, they're going to see they're going to see a backlash against them, and Dr. Tedros too, and WHO, and the World Health Organization also, for the mishandling of this crisis.
Okay, thanks for your perspective. So Renee, if you look at it, right, the data suggests that older people have far higher chance of getting infected. But even with that fact, country like Japan, which has much larger older population, is far less impacted compared to US or Europe, which relatively has less percentage of older people compared to Japan, right? And there are other examples similar to that as well. So why is it that Europe and US got so much of infection, but rest of the world, right, if you look at proportionately, hasn't been even South, if you look at it, South Korea, it did start in South Korea much sooner, much earlier, but then they could contain. So what is this dichotomy?
Well, I think it's two parts. I think it's culture and politics. And the culture in Japan, they're not so, touchy-feely like the Italians are. So that might be one aspect. I think with the culture and Japan people, they do a lot of holistic things, which actually makes your immune system really high. So I know in Japan culture, they're really big on like holistic things. And the Italian people, the Italians are always hugging and kissing. So that might be another aspect. And also when I was doing some research, I want to read this because Japan has an older population like Italy, but Japan wasn't, nearly affected. So again, I think it's holistic. And also, because most people don't know this, I just found this out. So I just want to read it. It's in early 2019, the older people in Italy got an untested new form of influenza vaccine that had 4 different strains of influenza, including the highly pathogenic H1N1. And it has been researched and documented that the flu shot makes COVID worse. So they were saying that being that the older generation in Italy, they were getting this flu shot, it actually made it worse for them to get the coronavirus. So that was one aspect why the older generation in Italy had such a high death rate and Japan didn't. So, and also with the politics. Now in the USA, the CDC, they changed it in March 4th. They're saying, label everything coronavirus, COVID death, COVID-19 death. And now the doctors and the nurses, they're coming out and they're like revolting, like this isn't right, because they want the COVID death rates high in the USA. They want it high, and I know why. Because election is coming, and the Democrats will do anything to take power. The media has been making up lies. I mean, this has been going on since Trump got elected in 2016. These numbers here in New York, in United States, no, they are absolutely not correct, because the CDC is forcing these doctors and nurses to make the number so high to make it look bad. But in reality, I mean, these people are coming in, say with a heart attack or diabetes, and they're just labeling them COVID-19, COVID-19. So it's all this evil plot to make Donald Trump look so bad, make him look like a killer. And the sickening thing behind it is the media is blaming Trump for all the deaths. They don't even want to accuse China for it. They want to accuse Trump. This is how sick the media has become. So each country is different. I think it depends on your immunity, and the USA, there's a lot of sick people in the USA. So I think it's both, how high and strong your immunity is, and also politically. When it comes to the USA, a lot of it is not true, and it's for one agenda: to destroy Donald Trump for the next election in November.
Okay, thank you so much. David, can we understand from your perspective why the percentage of death or the casualty in Spain, Italy is much higher compared to other countries like South Korea, for example, or even in Israel, or Germany? The percentage wise, if you look at it, the Spain or Italy seem to have far higher percentage of casualty. So what could be the reason behind that?
Okay, so I can tell you exactly why Italy and Spain in particular have suffered so egregiously from the virus. And actually, to understand Italy in the first instance, back towards the end of the last century, in the late 1990s, and then into the noughties, and over the last 30 years or so, China has bought up a large section of manufacturing companies in textiles and leather goods in Lombardy, in the northern part of Italy. And guess what? Guess where they sourced? They then sourced workers to go to work in those factories, not Italians, Chinese. And guess which part of China they came from? Yes, Wuhan. 100,000 Wuhan workers, either illegal or legally, were working in northern Italy. They went home, or substantial numbers of them traveled back and forth back in January, late January, for the Chinese New Year. And that as Francois pointed out earlier, that's one of the ways in which the virus jumped out of China into the rest of the world. So that's why Italy suffered so badly. And that was then compounded by the likes of the mayor of Milan, for example, wanting to prove that he wasn't a racist, urging the Italians in Milan to hug a Chinese. Well, that didn't work out too well, did it? And then when it comes to Spain, we need to understand the two major Spanish cities. If you look at Madrid and if you look at Barcelona, 50% of business, small shops in Madrid are owned by the Chinese. So yet again, what we see is the Chinese imperial empire has spread on a commercial basis around the world. And again, in Spain, we had the exact same thing happened. We had a large influx of Chinese people traveling around the Chinese New Year from Wuhan into Spain, unprotected, and the virus got a grip there as well. So these two major European countries suffered predominantly because, one, China has bought up a large chunk of their business and imported many hundreds of thousands of Chinese. And in the second instance, both countries weren't prepared to secure their borders. They weren't prepared to do what the Chinese did in China. They kept the borders open. And then what have they met? They've met with a terrible tsunami of death. And that's exactly why. And that needs to be, I believe that my news platform, altnewsmedia.net, we were the first people back in March to flag up for Italy and Spain this particular reason. It's very uncomfortable for the mainstream media because the mainstream media believe in open borders, but actually open borders killed tens of thousands of Spanish and Italian people. But will they admit it? Probably not.
Understood. Very well put, David. Ravi, you have, since you have suffered, and we are sad for that you suffered the infection, but since you have gone through it, can you share from your personal experience about the healthcare system in the US, particularly in New York, where you live, and the testing facility, and about the vaccine research that's going on? What are your perspective on that?
Well, we have we have probably the world's best healthcare system, contrary to all the negative, categorization. But let me just make a comment or two about the prior comments. Francois was exactly correct about Dr. Tedros of WHO, because the leadership of the world relies upon the WHO to sound a global alarm if there's a problem for leaders to be aware of and to manage. And they didn't do that. And Dr. T's got to go if he has any shame at all. Now, I am as you know, I'm a Democrat, Dhiren, and Renee is right that there is a problem, but she's accusing the Democrats of doing this, and it's not. Actually, it's Medicare that puts a bounty of $11,000 more is paid to a doctor or a hospital if you list a death as COVID-19, and if a ventilator is used, $39,000 more is paid. Now that's a generic governmental regulation under the current administration. So I don't think that can be any effect on numbers can be put to the head or feet of any one particular party. And with respect to and that of course answers part of the question of our healthcare system. Look, the problem that exists, and this ties into WHO, is China bought up PPEs from the United States. Our own stockpile that we had and was commercially available or governmentally available, China bought it up in January by giving direction to their diplomatic missions all over the world to get it. And the stuff either went to China, or even if it didn't go to China but was owned by China, they then sold it for almost 1,000% profit, give or take, for what they bought it for, whether it had gone back or it was still in the United States, but they owned it. And then they were giving it back. So they were buying from the Americans to give back to the Americans. It's a very
So are you alluding that Chinese living in US, actually some Chinese people, we don't want to talk about Chinese in general, but some Chinese people actually hoarded this critical healthcare protections material, and then they made profit out of that? Is that
No,
what
I'm
you're
not
alluding
saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying something much more damning. I am saying that China gave instructions to its diplomats to buy PPEs, okay, and
So-
ship it to China, okay?
So it was not
And whether or
individuals.
not it was
but,
shipped, they then resold it at a huge profit, okay?
Okay.
So why did they know that all of us would need PPEs in January? So China knew there was a pandemic coming before the WHO, who should have known because they're forensic cops, they should have been there in December. I mean, the fact remains that on December 1, there was patient 0 in Wuhan who was hospitalized. And Sweden, by the way, got coronavirus patients in November 2019. So, but the one that we all have the genome for is the January virus, not the December or the November virus, and the one that was released on December 30th, 2019 at the Wuhan seafood market. And they're two different viruses, albeit related. So the fact is, our healthcare system is doing as best as it can, having been surprised because the WHO is our governmental alarm system, and our home alarm system didn't go off. So there was miscalculations by every leader of every country because the WHO didn't sound the alarm as they're supposed to. And you cannot accuse that leadership for having missteps because the system didn't work. And the system being China, if you make a mistake, if you bump into somebody, you say you're sorry. When Chernobyl occurred, the world knew. When we had a 3-mile accident, we told the world this occurred. So everybody,
Okay.
you protect your citizens.
Okay.
China didn't do that, and WHO as well didn't do that.
Okay, and you have written to President Trump, from your personal experience, you have sent certain suggestions. Can you briefly tell our viewers what have you suggested?
What I wrote to the president after spending about 2 weeks on doing the research on biochemistry and epidemiology and getting to be familiar with it, I discovered a shocking fact that the SARS virus of 2003, which came from bats, had as a component of that particular virus, had a mushroom on it, okay? And that mushroom is a master key to get through an autoimmune system. And the current virus, COVID-19, was that particular component, which is technically known as spike glycoprotein S, okay? That it was spliced off the SARS virus of 2003, and it was then transplanted onto this virus, the current virus, which is AIDS virus. And this genetically modified virus, which we now see very famously, looks like an exotic bouquet, that mushroom on top does not come out of the AIDS virus. That comes out of the SARS virus of 2003. And what I had anecdotally referred to as the Trojan horse, well, it ends up technically being a Trojan horse because my autoimmune system and anybody's autoimmune system doesn't even know it's being infected. So the science was put in the letter, and I asked the president that given what China has done, China must pay compensation for the negligence of allowing, and that's giving them credit, that, without, as Francois said earlier, he doesn't believe there's a conspiracy, but there's a criminal act, a criminal negligence. So I wrote on the 14th of April, it's in the public domain, and the White House got it, and it was also directed to the Speaker Pelosi and Majority Leader McConnell. And the White House got it on the 14th evening. 15th morning, they reviewed the science, they reviewed the letter, and by later on the 15th of April, an investigation of China was started. And a couple of days later, it went into a full-blown investigation. And now the president has used, I said, in my letter, it was a plague. The president has used that word. I raised the issue of whether we were Pearl Harbor, because China has a history of not doing anything episodically or ad hoc. Everything is very deliberate, very well digested. And the fact that I'm very troubled by this is, even if the breach of the lab was accidental, if it was accidental, they should have sounded the alarm to the world. They didn't do that. So they're responsible for not doing that. So there's compensation coming to us in the world for negligence. After they did what they did, they even then didn't sound the alarm. They allowed their tourists to go all over the world. And you know, it's a hit and run problem. And so they have, you know, and that's without being Pearl Harbored. The worst issue was the West Pearl Harbored? And for that, I don't have enough evidence, and neither does the president, which is why the president is now absolutely, you know, he's canceled the funding for WHO after he's received my letter. There's a full investigation going on. And as a result, we will find, hopefully not, you know, hopefully all the facts, but we will find why China did it. But more importantly, my interest is in finding the right vaccine, not 12 and 20 vaccines, all of which miss the mark, because they all will miss the mark, because we don't have the genome of patient 0 who was hospitalized in Wuhan on December 1, 2019. And in December, there were 14 cases, and the protein makeup of those infections are different than the ones after the seafood market where the second virus was released. And by the way, December 30th, they release it. And on January 1, without taking tissue or blood samples, they power wash the market. Have you ever seen Columbo go to a place, you know, a crime scene, and wash it all down before he's got a chance to have forensics come? This is crazy. So there was a cover-up. So not only was there a breach, intentional or accidental, but the cover-up certainly was intentional.
So what you're suggesting, Ravi, is that probably it is an engineered virus and not natural virus.
It cannot be a natural virus, because you cannot, a horse and a donkey can mate, which is the only exception in nature, and you get a mule, okay? So, but Mother Nature has a one species rule. Darwinism is a one species principle, okay? So the fact that this can go from human beings to dogs to cats, etc., this violates the principle of number one principle of Mother Nature. This was lab engineered, and frankly, I hope that Mother Nature's automatic circuit breakers, that you cannot have the cross-species infections, will actually save us, because until we don't get the right genome, patient 0s in China, and by the way, Sweden has COVID cases in November, which I suspect are the original patient 0 type. So there is a way to maybe get that. But unless we have the right problem, you cannot come up with the right vaccine. And if we don't have the right vaccine, the world as we know it, that we left behind, is not coming back.
Got it. Thanks for the elaborate answer, Ravi. So Francois would like to understand, right, why the number of cases in South Asia, and you are living in India, so I would like to understand your perspective in South Asia or Africa, where the healthcare system is first of all, the population density is very, very high in those parts of the world, and the medical facility, the hygiene, the civic facility are not up to the level of what US or Europe has. Then why in those parts of the world the infection rate is much lower?
Right. So I'm not a doctor, and I know this has been contested, but I do believe that the virus spreads easier in cold climates, cold and temperate climate, from cold to temperate. Now, I was in France actually when the India announced it was closing its borders, and so we cut short our trip because I felt that I would be safer in India. I'm in Tamil Nadu now. I'm right in the middle of Tamil Nadu. There are two aspects. One, it is true that there are very little cases. Where we are, there may be 4. Pondicherry has 4 cases. Then the district where we are in Tamil Nadu, there may be 5 or 6 cases. So, and the heat has started. Now it is 35 degrees, 36 degrees. The heat has started. It doesn't seem to spread in hotter climate. I may be wrong about that, and I know that many doctors are saying the contrary. Now, the second aspect, it is true that medical facilities in India would be overwhelmed. If there was, like the New York Times with a lot of, gleefulness as predicted, or the French magazine Le Monde, or some of my French friends that said there are going to be millions of cases in India, it is true that the hospital system would not be geared to it. Recently, one of my wife's close friends died. She died not from coronavirus, she died from renal failure. We took her to a hospital. There were no doctors. The doctors had gone underground. There was no facilities, no oxygen. Going there was big problem. So true. True. If India is hit by a big number of coronavirus deaths or contamination, it will be a great problem. But at the moment, there are 1,300,000,000 people in India, and I think there are 2,000 deaths from the coronavirus. So it's 0.0000 maybe 3%. I would like to say a word here about the fact that the Western media has been very hostile towards India. They've all predicted that India is going to be hit very hard by the coronavirus. They've all predicted that millions will die in India. They predicted famines, even saying that Africa and some parts of it will have famines. As a journalist, I'm shocked, that the duty of a journalist is to tell the fact, but also to reassure people, to give positivity. And the media, generally, US media, French media, even Indian media, has been very negative in spreading fear and panic amongst people. And it's the same in India. But in India, I can tell you, because I live in a rural area, at the moment, it is not spreading. Whether it is because of the heat or because of other reasons, I believe it's because of the heat. And also because people in India have more antibodies. They're used to infection. They used to drink a lot, contaminated water. So they have built maybe more, antibodies. The same might be true in South Africa and parts of Africa. But at the moment, countries where there is more heat and more promiscuity seems to be doing better than European countries where more hygiene.
Thank you. You mentioned that media is spreading negativity, and media's duty is to also spread positivity. But that's what we see world across today. That media is spreading a lot of negative news. Is it for TRP? Is it for commercial interest? We don't know, but
it is spreading fear. So I have friends in Auroville, French people, who have been here for 40 years. They rushed back to France because they thought they would be safer in France. But actually, in France at the moment, though, tomorrow they're supposed to open up. There is so much confusion, so much infighting, so many restrictions that it's. My friend I did the right thing by coming back here, and he did the wrong thing by rushing back to France, because it's better here for sure. There's more freedom, there is less casualties, less restrictions.
Thank you. David, you recently posted on social media a very interesting article, bit controversial as well. Can you share with our viewers what is that? I mean, you did mention about some of the analysis, etc., done by independent journalists as well as your own perspective. Can you share with our viewers what you are alluding to?
Yeah, well, basically, the point of the article is to talk about the tyranny of experts. Because all we've heard through this whole process has been, the experts, and listen to the experts. And, Ravi, we've talked about the World Health Organization and its important role. But one of the things that's been most fundamental across certainly the Western world has been the work of a guy called Professor Neil Ferguson at Imperial College in London. And his models, his computer modeling back in March suggested there would be 500,000 deaths in the US and 2 million deaths, 500,000 deaths in the UK and 2 million deaths in the US. And it was in response to that we got locked down. That's why we were locked down. Now, Professor Ferguson, who leads this expert team, has got a career-long history of consistently getting it catastrophically wrong. He predicted there'd be a couple of million people die through mad cow disease. It was 247. This is a guy whose track record is complete failure. He was at the center of the policy which we've endured and continue to endure in the UK, and which I bitterly resent, the lockdown. And it's happened, I know, in the States and most countries, I think, in the West anyway, have gone this route. So the point of this article was really to sort of say that when we get these experts proclaiming their great knowledge and politicians then respond to the experts, what you need to do is, before you respond, you have to critically examine what is their track record, what is the basis on which they make these great pronouncements. I mean, in the UK, we're being guided by a body which advises the UK government called SAGE. It's a group of scientists. Scientists don't care about the economy. Scientists don't care about, for example, the suicides and the depression and all the other things that accompany locking a people down for over almost 2 months. So it's, you know, I basically do not have a lot of time for experts. And in this regard, Professor Ferguson, who, by the way, was sacked last week, this august Professor Ferguson, which has kept us all, whose models have kept us in lockdown, guess what? He wasn't being locked down because, unfortunately, his married lover visited him, thus breaking UK rules. And, oh dear, he had to be sacked. So we're being governed by not just people who don't even understand, their models are wrong, but they're hypocrites. And that's another reason why, certainly here in the UK, I like to think I'm one of the people most ardently against the continued lockdown of our society. Final point, Dhiren. In this scenario, I believe that the cure for coronavirus is actually worse than coronavirus. It's destroying our economies, it's destroying families, it's destroying our life, and we cannot continue on this trajectory. So that's why, you know, we really need to get our liberty back. And one of the steps in doing that is to stop listening to experts.
Yeah, very critical of the experts. And yes,
if I could just add, Dhiren, if I could just add in support of David's point about tyranny of experts, and the best example is not every monk in a monastery understands the word of God equally.
Yeah, so yeah, I think David, very critical the way you put it, and the data suggests that, you know, the way what the experts have been saying, they are clueless, but they are so somehow projected or viewed as expert, and those who are propping up them as expert are,
no,
I think.
David absolutely nailed it. He absolutely nailed it. They want to destroy our economy. These experts have been wrong from the very beginning. You know, that again, it's all about politics, a lot of it, especially here in the US. They want to destroy our economy. We don't need this lockdown. Open up the country, please. This is getting ridiculous and out of hand, and it's unconstitutional. He couldn't even said it anywhere. Totally agree with David.
So Renee, you talked about politics. So let's cover in the next segment about the politics. But before we go to the next segment on politics, Francois, you recently tweeted an article of yours, talking about Aurobindo in the context of coronavirus. Why do you think this is the time to remember Aurobindo?
No, actually, what Aurobindo said is that men are puppets. There are forces, it's a very ancient knowledge, actually. There are forces that prompt men to do certain things. Some forces are more divine, some forces are more what they call asuric, or some others call adharmic, or called evil. I don't believe, good and evil. I think men are prompted by different things. But some things are evolutionary, they tend towards a better world. And some things tend to sink the world down. Now, if you see what is coming with the coronavirus, apart from the physical infection, apart from the fever, everything, what comes with it is that fear, panic, negativity. There's a lot of negativity that is going on. All these allopaths, who are giving contrary opinions, who are scaring the world, the media, which has inflated the problems 1,000,000 times, governments who are trying to be more conservative than the others. So we can see that with the virus, there comes a lot of negativity, what Aurobindo called asuric. So we can put it in a more logical manner by saying there's a Chinese element, whether the Chinese willfully let the coronavirus spread to America to destroy American economy, which I'm not sure.
Got it.
You know, or whether they thought, okay, what the hell, let Chinese people go abroad and let the world deal with it. There is an evil element, there is an historic element in that. So that's what I meant. I didn't want to say, oh, this is good, this is bad, Chinese are evil. But definitely with the coronavirus comes destruction. So many people are suffering, economic suffering, companies are collapsing, people individually are suffering. I can see it in India. People are suffering so much. So that there is with the coronavirus something which is anti-evolutionary, which tends to, make the world regress. But ultimately, in Shlobinov's light, I would say that a better good will come out in spite of the Chinese, in spite of a better good will come out of it. That the world will come out better. Once, everything is settled and the Chinese pay the price of what the Dalai Lama called the black karma of the Chinese, the world will be a better place.
Okay, thank you so much. So viewers, with that, we end our second segment and we hope to see you in our third segment. Thank you. So welcome back, viewers. In this last segment, we'll talk about politics and sensitivity around calling the virus as Chinese virus. There is more focus in media at times as to why is this called Chinese virus and less focus on the accountability, etc. So let's talk about that. And starting with you, David, right? Many diseases have been called, in past, if you look at it, a lot of diseases have been named after the region. So we have been calling, things like Spanish flu, or even in case of, coronavirus, there is this Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome coronavirus. And there are other examples like Japanese encephalitis, etc. So why is now there is so much of sensitivity calling this particular disease after the region where it came from?
Well, quite simply, it's deflection by the Chinese Communist Party. That's why. So you can have German measles, you can have Ebola disease, you can have Spanish flu, which, by the way, may not have started in Spain. It may have started in China, but we'll leave that to one side for one moment. Quite clearly, the Chinese Communist Party do not want China to carry the can for a virus which by any definition appears to have started in Wuhan in China. So I'm happy to call it the China virus or the Wuhan virus because that's accurate. So the only reason that the Chinese don't want this is because it labels and puts responsibility and accountability firmly on their shoulders, and they don't want that. And that's why the Western media, which is so spineless, have more or less gone along with this. And they, if you call it a China virus like President Trump did, well, all of a sudden you're racist. No, you're not racist. You're accurate, and accuracy matters. This virus started in China. It's the China virus.
So you are saying that China doesn't want it. Obviously, no country wants any kind of bad things to be attached to their name. I'm sure Spain doesn't want Spanish virus name at all. But are you saying that because China doesn't want, or Chinese Communist Party doesn't want, and everybody falling into line, at least the mainstream media, the so-called liberals, etc., are you saying that they have far more control over this mainstream media or liberal, that they are able to make them fall to their line or their narrative?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the good things to come out of this is that many of us now see the degree of control that the Chinese Communist Party has around the world. We've talked in the earlier section about its control of the World Health Organization, but it's got massive economic control over massive conglomerates. It's got many billions, millions, hundreds of millions invested in all kinds of companies. They don't want to they don't want to become unfriendly with China. So China's economic power is crucial in understanding why. And you just have to look, and it's a warning for us all. People are afraid to call it the China virus because they don't want to make enemies of the Chinese, even though, in my view, the Chinese Communist Party is the enemy of the civilized world.
Thank you so much. Renee, coming back to you, right? if you look at the top 5 states in the US where there is the most effect of pandemic, the number of cases and number of deaths, they're all Democrat ruled, right? And yet we hear more blame and more criticism of the Trump administration. If you look at New York, for example, right, Cuomo is a Democrat governor, which is the most affected. New Jersey, again, ruled by Democrat governor. So why is this dichotomy that we see constant criticism of the, yes, definitely the federal government is accountable, not to say they are not, but why is there so much of criticism and healthcare system, which is the state, owned in US? Why there's not much? And in fact, Cuomo is being made out as a hero, and somebody opposing Cuomo as the Democrat president.
The love gov. All of a sudden, he's like, the love gov. His ego is about as high as you can go, coming on television. And he's like, the sky is falling, the sky is falling. And, and everybody's going around, he's the love gov. And then he needed 30,000 ventilators. And then he only needed 5,000 ventilators. He's like, everything's like a hyperbole with him. And another thing with the Democratic states, obviously, we all know that the media and the Democrats hate Trump. They hate his guts, and they've been doing everything since that man got elected back in 2006 to destroy him. They wasted so much time and taxpayers' money with this Russia hoax, with this impeachment, and instead of working for the American people, they are against America, and they are against the American people because they don't do anything but waste their time on a bunch of BS. I mean, get over it already. And if you look at it, Donald Trump's right. It's only the Democratic states that needs a bailout. New York wants a bailout. New Jersey wants a bailout. You don't see that with the Republican states. And in the meantime, like here in New Jersey, everybody is livid with Murphy because we pay high property taxes here. And he took away our home rebate and he's given it to illegal immigrants. So it's just, that's why the Democrats hate Trump. Everybody knows it. They see it all on TV. You see it in the media bashing Trump. All the Democrats just about are bashing Trump. That's why it's like that, is because they have so much hatred for Donald Trump because they want power back, and they will do anything to get power back at the expense of the American people and our beautiful country. Donald Trump built up since he came in office in 2016. And I get touchy on this because I'm sick and tired of the media, and I'm sick and tired of these Democrats wasting my time and my taxpayers' money. Get over it already. The man won the election, fair and square.
Sure. And can you talk to us about Dr. Fauci? And, there are controversies around him. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so I don't know if anybody heard of her yet. I'm sure you did. Dr. Judy Mikovits. She is going viral. Her books are selling off the charts. This producer did a video with her. She exposes Fauci, the CDC, and the video up on YouTube. YouTube is taking them down as fast as they come. Facebook is taking it down as fast as they come. Because I wrote it down here. In 1991, she published in the Journal of Science, animal and human fetal tissues were unleashing devastating plagues of chronic diseases. And Big Pharma waged war on her. They set her up. They made it look like she was stealing things from the lab. And Fauci was behind the cover-up. He paid everybody off in his organization, including the investigators. He paid them off. He is so corrupt, Fauci, and she exposes Fauci and because she's been working with him for a few decades ago, and she talks about the CDC. You have to see.
I think we should leave that topic because I have a different view on a lot of this stuff.
And also, another thing that she had mentioned, that in 1980, there's this act, it's called the Baldo Act, and it was that act where inventors could get royalties for their patent vaccinations. And at that point, it was when science was destroyed, when these people can get royalties. That's why they want vaccinations. That's why they want mandatory vaccinations, because Fauci and the rest of them, they are making billions and killing millions. And the truth is coming out, and people are hearing the truth, because it was just incredible, her story, and everybody is taking to it. That's why YouTube and Facebook are on a rampage. Second you put it up, it's gone. They don't want the truth out. And this is all corruption, because they're making billions of dollars by these vaccinations from the act that came out in 1980 that gave royalties to people like Fauci.
Thanks, Renee. So Ravi, you are a registered Democrat.
Boy, I feel under pressure and threat here.
we are bringing. So we at the Global Perspectives want to bring all the perspectives, both sides. So this is your opportunity. Fire off.
Thank you. First of all, I acknowledge Renee's First Amendment rights, and she's entitled to her opinion. And let me just, for the record, say that while she's a lovely person, her most recent comments about the political process, as well as Dr. Fauci, I disagree with on many levels. But let me get to the issues at hand, which is what we're dealing with. So the question of politics needs to be defined even in sharper focus. One, the main issue at the moment is geopolitics. Okay, then comes national politics, then comes local politics. And Andrew Cuomo, by the way, has won himself a lot of viewers all over the world because he has a very steady hand on the rudder of the state of state. And like in any war, you don't bring to the battlefield, just enough bullets because as if you know how many enemy soldiers are going to be there. You always bring many more bullets. So having more ventilators is better than not having less. So that's just one little point. But let's go to geopolitics for a minute. China, let's assume, give them a benefit of the doubt, that this breach in the lab in Wuhan was accidental. Although China doesn't do anything that's ad hoc, okay? They have OBOR, One Belt, One Road initiative. They have the AIIB Bank. They've got South China Sea and East China Sea and all the aggression. Recently, just 2 weeks ago, the Chinese Foreign Ministry issued instructions to their diplomats, get this, to their diplomats to act like warrior wolves, which is a movie that was shown in China about 8 or 10 years ago that showed a Chinese commando beating up American soldiers in Africa without any weapons, single-handedly, and being the winner. While at the same time, Hollywood in the United States, we're making movies like The Martian, where we've got an astronaut stuck in Mars, and we have a Chinese American working in NASA, and we've got working and respectfully with the Chinese space agency, and we're grateful to them for the help, et cetera, et cetera. So it's very odd that while we in the United States have a generous, open arm view to the world, China was training its citizens to dislike America. So I'm very troubled by this warrior wolf attack mode that they ask diplomats to do. The job of diplomats is to be able to say no and the listener wanting to hear it again. It is not for a diplomat to be belligerent. And yet that's what they're doing. Francois talked about it, that in France they're doing all this. And in England, in fact, where David is, the Chinese ambassador in England attacked anyone who says China is responsible. So China is ground zero. They have denied, going back to my metaphor and the tyranny of experts, I said not every monk understands God's word equally. Well, here, China has denied us a full Bible. We don't have the entire medical facts. And that is their biggest crime. And that is what we need first. Accountability, compensation, whether or not we were Pearl Harbor, those are all subsequent issues. First and foremost, we need them to open up, give us the full medical record so we can come up with the right vaccine, so we can minimize the damage that we're all suffering. And we are suffering the damage. And so politically speaking, we are in a perfect storm. And I was recently interviewed about 10 days ago by the South Asian Times, and it's in the public domain. I said, we're in a perfect storm. On the one hand, China is being belligerent. Having done wrong, instead of apologizing, they're bashing the victims that are hurt or dead. So very strange. And domestic politics, and it's the only thing I'll talk about domestic politics on this, is both the Democrats and the Republicans, and in the Republican side, to wit, President Trump, both have to prove to the American voting population that they're not a Manchurian candidate, that they're going to stand up to China. And I am delighted that the day after the White House and Secretary Pompeo got my letters of April 14th, an investigation started, and then a fuller investigation thereafter. So I am fully expecting President Trump to ask for WHO to be essentially to be disbanded beyond defunding, and asking for China. I expect him to cancel the trade deal, which I will tell you, China negotiated hard to include a force majeure clause, but force majeure clause, while common in normal civil contracts, are not common in treaties or agreements between countries, but they did it. And more importantly, which is not even in civil contracts, they added the word pandemic. And this was signed on January 15th, when China knew on December 1 that there was a coronavirus outbreak. So for China to insist upon an escape clause, knowing that they were going to escape, I expect President Trump to cancel the trade deal and take on China as China needs to be taken on, because I don't want Chinese Navy bothering our ships like they just did 2 weeks ago in the South China Sea.
Got it. But why do you see that Democrats are not as critical of China like Republicans are? And liberal media, right, is absolutely sympathizer and actually supporting the Chinese narrative. So while on one side, I understand that, Republicans are maybe, exaggerating the matter, if at all. But on the other side, Democrats are seemingly not as critical as they need to be, and the mainstream media or the liberal media.
I don't agree. I don't agree with that predicate, because in fact I expect that the Foreign Sovereignty Act, which protects China from being sued in our courts, I expect there will be a carve out for coronavirus. One. Second, the Biden campaign, for example, is attacking President Trump as being too cuddly or soft with China. And of course, President Trump will then attack Biden that when he was vice president, he went with his son and he got $1.5 billion from China. So This is why it's a perfect storm, because China is being belligerent and our two main parties are attacking each other as being too soft on China. So I expect the United States will be very hard on China, as China has well earned.
Okay. Francois, coming to you, right, completely on a different topic, right? We have seen, especially in India, but also around the world, where while there is a lockdown or social distancing norms, there have been violations of lockdown in mosques, especially during Ramadan and even before that. There have been attacks on the healthcare worker who are actually, putting their life on the line to protect the citizens. There have been attacks on the policemen, on the security forces who are there to maintain the lockdown. And yet we see that the politics around that has been very vitiated. So what's your view on this violation of lockdown, which we see across the world, but specifically in India? And David, I'll come to you in UK also. You posted certain videos, etc. on that. So Francois, your perspective on that.
Right. No, I don't want to generalize, and I will only speak about India because this is what I have witnessed. And also, it is not the majority of Muslims. I believe there are many enlightened, many, educated Muslims who do not approve of this. But what we have seen in India is that some of the Muslims, rural Muslims, in the cities also, they believe three things. One is that the coronavirus is a punishment of Allah, particularly against the Chinese, because the Chinese have been very hard on their own Muslim minority. As you know, they have imprisoned nearly 1 million of them in re-education camps. They have closed mosques. They have banned, many things that are very dear to the Muslims. So many Muslims in India, I don't want to speak for the rest of the world, believe that coronavirus is a punishment of Allah upon, upon the West, upon the Chinese, upon the West. The second thing, many Muslims believe they're immune to the coronavirus, that it will not touch them. As it is the punishment of Allah, there is no reason why they should become contaminated. And the third one, which is a little more touchy and difficult to talk about, is that there have been many videos circulating in Indian social media, and also I believe a little bit in mainstream media, of Muslims spitting, on vegetables, or someone, a Muslim making bread, spitting on the dough, before cooking the bread, wanting to spread the virus. So these three things have been very visible and a little, unsettling in India. And what is also unsettling is that many Muslims, and these videos have been widely circulated, many Muslims attacked nurse and doctors who came to, look after them. They attacked policemen. There are so many videos circulating of Muslims, attacking policemen in India and even hurting them badly. So I would say that in India, there's been a shift because of that. Many, if you say anything about Muslims, as in the West, in India, you're treated as an Islamophobe, you're an Islamophobe. But because of this video, which have been widely circulating, and it can't be ignored really by the mainstream media, I think in the popular opinion in India, there's been a shift a little bit that maybe, although Mr. Modi has been very quiet about it, maybe there is, something wrong with that community. There was a big meet in Delhi, as you have heard about it, of 3,000 people. It's a movement called the Tablighi Jamaat. They're quite fundamentalist, and they came from all over the world.
Jamaat. Yeah.
It was banned. They came from Indonesia, from Saudi Arabia, everywhere. And though the coronavirus was there, the confinement was there. They met, they ate together, they slept together. And many of these are believed to have contaminated others when they went back to Tamil Nadu or Mumbai or different parts of India. So a great source of contamination in India came from the Muslim community, from this Tablighi Jamaat. So there has been a shift, and that's what I was saying. Some positiveness, some truth, because we are all about truth. Let the truth come out. Let the truth come out. That's what we want. And the Muslim community has not been seen in a very good light. Again, I don't want to generalize, but there's been a shift in the opinion in India about how this community behaved in the face of the coronavirus.
And certainly we are not generalizing, because even I had discussions with my Muslim friends, and some of them have different views. Some of them do agree that these things should have been prevented, and Muslim community as a large should have taken responsibility of containing after recognizing that Tablighi Jamaat. At least they should have come forward, self-quarantine, etc. But yeah, anyway.
If I could just add to this, I have many diplomatic friends who are from Muslim countries and in New York, and they understand that coronavirus does not discriminate based upon religion. So they too have been in quarantine and Groundhog Day. This is a problem of politics rather than science. And if we can get to the science and let politics follow the science, we'll be better off.
Got it. David, can you share you have posted on social media about situation in UK?
Yeah, and I mean, again, I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to generalize. This is not saying all Muslims, but it nonetheless has to be said that in the UK, we've got a particular problem because a section of the Muslim community really doesn't, it's not integrated into the broader British community. So it doesn't necessarily follow the laws of the British community. And the fact that this whole lockdown has coincided with Ramadan, well, that's caused a few interesting issues. Not least that initially the mosques were pretty slow off the mark to close. Well, then they did close. But we still see incidents such as one I posted a couple of nights ago happened in London, heart of London, Finsbury Park Mosque, where there was a large incident happened between a significant number of Muslim worshippers. I'm not sure what they were worshipping because the mosque is closed, but they were there, and a significant section of the police. But by and large, in Britain, the police are very reluctant, let's say, to impose the same restrictions that the rest of us have on the Muslim community. So the fact is, if you're on a British beach on your own, that could be seen as breaking lockdown conditions. But if you're a mob of about 40 or 50 people outside Finsbury Park Mosque, well, it might take quite a bit to get a couple of police officers to turn up and have a discreet word in your ear. So you know, again, not generalizing, but there have been quite a few incidents. And there has been another issue which we probably don't have time to talk on, but nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that some of the areas in the UK that have the highest level of coronavirus infection and death also happen to coincide with areas where there's significant Muslim populations. Now, I'm not blaming the Muslim people. There may be many reasons for that, but it's something we shouldn't hide from either. There has been some sort of, and I'm not sure why, but some relationship between the two things. As in all these matters, we've got to speak what we find and then come to conclusions.
Thank you so much. So let's come to our last question for today's discussion. Renee, can you talk about, you mentioned about some video you posted on social media, on YouTube and Facebook, about the controversy and about the investigation that was taken down. So can you share with our viewers what is that video talking about?
It's Dr. Mikovits, and she was working with Dr. Falsey some decades ago. So when she had said that animal and human fetal tissues were unleashing devastating plagues, chronic plagues, that's when Big Pharma came after her. They had investigations. They planted things in her house to make it look like she stole lab materials because they didn't want the truth to come out about the vaccinations and you know, the 1980 Baldol Act, where these people like Falsey gets millions and millions of dollars if they can push vaccinations, push mandatory, because it's all about the money. And these vaccinations, for the most part, are you know, they're deadly. They're killing millions of people. So she basically, in her video, if you search YouTube or Facebook, you know, you can find it, or you can go to the producer. His website is plandemic.com. He has it up there for everybody to watch. You can download it and keep uploading it because YouTube and Facebook don't want it out. She tells all about the dangerous effects of vaccinations, how her research, they want her shut down, and she talks about how corrupt Falsey is, and it's just really great. And they're coming out with a documentary this summer about her whole ordeal that she went through, and people are listening to her. Her book is selling, The Plague of Corruption. It's selling like hotcakes. You can't even get it. It really is an incredible book, because she basically says the CDC and Falsey is corrupt, and Trump needs to fire Falsey because he is a fraud.
With that, we come to the end of today's program, viewers, and we will have a follow-up program on...
Could I just have 30 seconds? Could I just have 30 seconds?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. You know, Bob Dole, when he was senator and he was majority leader of the Senate, realized that the government was having a hard time competing to getting the best experts. And the way to do that was because government salaries don't pay much. So a conflict of interest was waived by the United States government, which was to allow government employees who are working and doing research to actually own patents and own various intellectual property rights. Today, universities have the same issue. Professors and researchers and research students, they're allowed to own, along with the university, because that's in the civil area, a private, not government. So universities own patents. So this particular issue, which drives that particular video, which I am familiar with quite well, is a mistaken predicate to a lot of stuff that went on. Now, the particular doctor has important things to say if you just listen to her about her biochemistry, but all this other stuff, the legal stuff, there is an entirely appropriate answer, and to continue to call Dr. Fauci corrupt is wrong, and it simply distracts and deflects from what we need to do, which is to get China to give us the full Bible of coronavirus from Wuhan. That's where we need to focus on. We need to stop doing the circular firing squad, which Americans love to do when there's a problem. We don't need to kill each other.
Yeah, good to have both sides of perspective and understand both perspectives very well. So viewers, with that, we end today's session. We'll come back with a follow-on program in aftermath of this pandemic, what the world would look like from, let's say, 2 to 5 years from now, rebalancing of powers, new alliances that may form, economic impact, and what industries may suffer, for a long, what industries may emerge as, beneficiary of this, which is very bad to have, but, there are going to be such situations. What countries could have different, what countries may become more prominent, what countries might lose. Right? We'll talk about that in the next program. So hope to see you there. And thank you so much, all the panelists. It was great having you.